The Ghost Behind the Hawk. The photograph was taken in October 2015 at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, San Diego on a Tuesday afternoon when the Pacific sky had gone the color of old pewter. Sergeant Major Thomas Walsh still had the original somewhere in a shoebox under his bunk, but it was the digital copy on his phone he stared at now, alone in the personnel records room at Fort Bragg, 11 o'clock at night, the building empty around him. 58 years old, 32 years of uniform. He had learned somewhere around year 15 that there was a particular stillness that came over a man when he recognized something impossible. Not the stillness of confusion. The stillness of understanding arriving before the mind was ready to receive it. This was that kind of stillness. He held his phone beside the photograph in the open file folder on the desk. The image on his phone was blurry. He had taken it fast that morning on the parade ground, moving his arm so it would look like he was checking messages rather than documenting anything. It showed the back of a woman, her PT shirt torn open from collar to mid-spine skin, exposed in the cold Carolina morning air. In the file folder, a hand-drawn sketch on graph paper, faded, creased at the folds, pulled from a classified operational file. He had no formal right to access, but did because 32 years, by certain courtesies from certain clerks, who understand that some men need to know things more than regulations need to prevent them from knowing. The image on the screen and the sketch in the folder were identical, not similar. Not reminiscent of each other. Identical. Wing for wing, feather for feather. The same hawk, the same spread of talons, the same precise shading on the leading edge of each primary feather that caught imaginary light from the upper left. Walsh knew where the sketch had come from. He had watched the man draw it. October 2015, the same month, the same base, the same flat Pacific sky. A man named James Reeves had sat at a folding table in a briefing room at Coronado with a sheet of graph paper and a mechanical pencil, and had drawn that hawk while Walsh talked through logistics for a training rotation that was going to be canceled before it started. Reeves had not looked up from the paper while he listened. He never did. His hands moved separately from his attention, filling in feathers and shadow, while his mind worked on whatever was actually important. Walsh had watched him for 20 minutes before asking what he was drawing. Reeves had looked up. He had a particular smile, not warm, not cold, something more precise than either. The smile of a man who had already considered most situations before they arrived and found the majority of them manageable. He said, "If you have to ask, you don't need to know yet." Colonel James Reeves had died in Syria in October 2018. His daughter, his only child, the one person he ever mentioned in unguarded moments, had been listed as killed in action 7 months later, April 2019, in an operation sealed at the highest classification level and never discussed in any room Walsh had clearance to enter. And yet, Walsh set the phone on the desk. He pulled the personnel file toward him and read the name at the top one more time, the way a man rereads something he has already understood, because understanding it once was not enough. Captain Maya Reeves, age 29, current assignment liaison officer, Joint Special Operations Training Center, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He had been in the same building with her for 3 days before this morning. 3 days eating in the same mess hall, walking the same corridors, and he had not seen it. But this morning, when Corporal Briggs had grabbed the collar of her PT shirt and the fabric had given way, and that hawk had appeared on her back in the pale early light of a Carolina dawn, Walsh had known in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He turned off the light, walked back to his quarters through the dark. He did not sleep. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the 82nd Airborne Division, 18th Airborne Corps, and enough classified activity that the men and women who work there learn early to stop asking questions that will never be answered. On any given morning, the parade ground at the Joint Special Operations Training Center holds somewhere between 60 and 80 personnel officers from multiple branches, rotating specialists, liaison attachments, trainees still learning which way to stand when a senior NCO enters a room. It is the kind of environment that rewards competence and punishes ambiguity. Men who have spent years in it develop a sharp radar for both. Captain Maya Reeves had arrived on a Thursday with a bag too light for a month-long assignment and a service record that said everything unremarkable about her and nothing true. 5'4", 119 pounds, dark hair pulled back in the tight regulation bun of someone who has learned to make herself geometrically correct so that no one can find fault with the surface and is therefore forced to look elsewhere. Her file listed 2 postings before this, one administrative at Fort Bragg, then Ramstein Air Base in Germany. No combat decorations, no advanced qualifications beyond standard officer training. Intelligence analyst. The kind of assignment that gets a person forgotten in the machinery of a large institution, which is sometimes exactly the point. She had been given a bunk in the officers' barracks, a locker, and a schedule of administrative tasks supply manifests, filing briefing support that confirmed on paper that she was exactly what Colonel Dennis Carver wanted her to be. Invisible, unimportant, easy to dismiss and easier to forget. Carver had noticed her the moment she arrived. He told himself this was because he noticed everything, that this was the discipline of 26 years in uniform, the product of 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, and a career that trains a man to read a room before the room reads him. He told himself this for 3 days. He was not sure he believed it. He was 61 years old, decorated. His office walls held the record of a life given to service. He had also in April of 2019 made a decision in a moment of desperation that had cost 3 men everything, and that he had been living inside of ever since, the way a man lives inside a house that is structurally compromised, aware of the cracks, unable to leave, telling himself the walls will hold. When he had seen Maya Reeves walk through the intake processing room on Thursday afternoon, small, quiet, looking at nothing in particular, with eyes that held the quality of someone who sees more than they let on, something old and cold had moved through his chest. He told himself he was imagining things. By the 4th morning, standing on the parade ground in the pre-dawn cold, he had almost believed it. The words cut the air the way he intended. Loud. Carrying. Captain Reeves, if you cannot maintain basic uniform standards, perhaps this assignment is above your pay grade. 60 officers and trainees stood in formation, breath visible in the cold. At the center of the concrete square, Maya stood alone. She did not move. The only sign of life was the careful, measured rise and fall of her chest. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. Breathing not calm by nature but by practice, built over years of putting it to use in situations where the alternative was coming apart. Carver descended from the platform. His boots were loud on the stone. He circled her slowly with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this before and knew its effect. The infraction was a small grease stain on her gray PT shirt, barely visible in the half-dark before dawn. Carver made it the center of the universe. This is what happens when we lower our standards. His voice carried to every corner of the formation. When we allow distractions into spaces that require focus. The way he said the word distractions left no ambiguity about what kind he meant. The formation shifted, a few suppressed smirks. The low-grade pleasure of watching someone else absorb what they might have had to absorb themselves. Maya's face was blank. Her hands hung loose at her sides. Anyone watching closely, and 2 men in the back row were watching very closely, would notice the only true sign of what this cost her. Her knuckles white against the cold tendons, standing out on her wrists like cable under tension. Carver stopped directly in front of her. Corporal Briggs, front and center. Ryan Briggs stepped out of the formation. 6'2", 230 pounds, the build of a man who had been the largest person in most rooms he'd entered since the age of 17. He had been grinning since the moment Carver said her name. He looked at Maya with the mild contempt of someone who expects no resistance and is therefore not prepared to offer any respect. "Inspect the captain's undershirt," Carver said. Regulation compliance. The order hung in the air for half a second, the half second in which everyone present understood that this had crossed from correction into something else. Then Briggs moved behind her. Maya did not turn, did not shift her weight. She looked straight ahead at the tree line beyond the perimeter fence and breathed. 4 counts in. The fabric pulled tight against her collar. 4 counts held. The seam gave way with a sound like a single clean tear of paper in a quiet room. 4 counts out. Cold air hit her back. The gas went through the formation before the laughter started, because what was revealed was not what anyone expected. Not bare skin and humiliation. Something that made the intake of breath involuntary. Ink, dark and intricate, covering the entire expanse of her back from shoulder to shoulder. A hawk wing's fully spread talons curled beneath each feather, rendered with a precision that had no business existing on human skin, but somehow did. At the center of the bird's chest, small text. At the base of the wings, more text, too small to read from distance, but close enough that the craftsmanship was unmistakable. The laughter came. Someone said it looked like something from a carnival. Lieutenant Derek Shaw, signals officer and natural gossip, made a comment about zoo memberships that got a response. Carver stepped back with his arms crossed and a smile performing satisfaction, while behind his eyes something very different was happening. In the back row, Sergeant Major Thomas Walsh did not laugh. He had gone completely still. Beside him, Commander Cord Halloran, Navy SEAL, 41 years old here, as JSOC, liaison for the training rotation, had also stopped moving. Walsh said it very quietly. Her hands, when Briggs grabbed the collar. Halloran, no flinch. No pull away. Like she was somewhere else entirely. Walsh, or like she's been through worse. Halloran said nothing. He was watching Maya walk toward the barracks building, back straight, pace steady, a fresh shirt already in her hand because she had brought one. As if she had known. As if she had planned for this humiliation, the way a soldier plans for weather, not because she wanted it, but because she understood the terrain. Halloran watched her until she disappeared through the door. Then he pulled out his phone. He did not know exactly what he was going to search for yet. He knew only that something at the back of his memory had shifted. Not surfaced, not fully formed, but moved like something large turning over in deep water. Inside the barracks bathroom, Maya stood in front of the cracked mirror. The torn shirt hung from her shoulders in two pieces. The hawk stared back at her from the glass wings framed by flat fluorescent light. She reached into her cargo pocket and took out the challenge coin, turned it over in her hand. The metal was worn smooth from years of handling, the edges rounded by the friction of 1,000 small moments of needing to hold something solid. On one face, the hawk insignia wings spread talons down. On the reverse, a serial number, IV 07114, her father's. He had carried it from 2013 until October 2018. He had pressed it into her hand in a field hospital outside Aleppo with what strength he had left, and said one thing before the morphine pulled him under for the last time. He had not said he loved her. She already knew, that had always known it, and he was not a man who repeated things already understood. He said, "Finish it." She had not been able to ask what he meant. She had known. She set the coin on the edge of the sink, pulled on the fresh shirt, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, not at the tattoo now covered, but at her own face. The face of a woman who had made two promises she intended to keep. The first had been made in that field hospital. Not in words, her father had been beyond words by then, but in the way of a person who has just watched someone they love die from a decision that someone else made for money, and has felt that fact settle into the place where certain decisions live permanently. She would not use what he had taught her unless there was no other way. She would be invisible. She would be patient. She would be exactly what they expected her to be for as long as it took, and she would not let grief or pride or exhaustion move her before she was ready. The second promise was newer. Renewed every night on the phone with her mother. She would come home. She picked up the coin, put it back in her pocket, walked out. Colonel James Reeves had started teaching her when she was 12 years old. Not because he planned to. Because she had found the range bag in the garage, had asked what it was for, and he had looked at her for a long moment, this small, serious child who had his eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and decided that the worst thing he could do was lie to her about what her father did. So he told her the truth. Not all of it. Enough. And he started teaching. By 14, she could field strip and reassemble an M4 in the dark. By 16, her father had introduced her to cryptography as a game sheets of graph paper on the kitchen table in Fayetteville, the same Fayetteville she was now walking through in a different uniform, under different pretenses. He taught her to think of encryption not as a code to be broken, but as a mind to be read. The person who wrote the cipher had a way of thinking. Find the way of thinking and the cipher opened itself. By 18, she had more practical skills than most soldiers twice her age. By 23, she had been recruited quietly through channels that left no paper trails into a unit that did not appear on any organizational chart. Iron Veil, Covert Reconnaissance and Direct Action, Syria and Iraq 2017 to 2019. Her father had built it. She had operated inside it, and in April of 2019, it had been destroyed not by the enemy, but by a decision made by a man inside the institution that was supposed to protect them. A man who had taken money in exchange for their lives and then signed his name to an abort order and watched the results from a safe distance. 3 operators had died. Maya had been listed as killed in action. The record had been sealed. She had spent the months that followed doing work that appears in no-file healing planning and learning the name of the man who had made the call. By the time she was ready, she had one name, a sealed file, and a coin with a serial number that was the only proof she needed of what she owed. Carver spent the afternoon in his office with Maya's personnel file open in front of him and read it 3 times, looking for something he could not name, some detail that would make her ordinary, some confirmation that the cold thing in his chest was paranoia rather than recognition. 0 combat deployments, 0 advanced qualifications, clean record, no anomalies. He closed the file. He thought about his son, 24 now, healthy, in remission for 3 years. Coaching high school baseball 40 minutes from this desk, calling his father on Sundays. Alive. In 2019, his son had been 20 years old and dying. The treatment existed, but it was experimental, not covered, carrying a price tag that bore no relationship to anything Carver had saved or borrowed or could obtain legally. He had been sitting in a parking garage outside a hospital in Raleigh when his phone rang a number he did not recognize, a voice he had never heard, a proposition he understood in the first 30 seconds to be the worst thing anyone had ever offered him. He had said no. He had driven home. He had sat at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning. Then he had called the number back. He had told himself then and in every moment since that a man does what he has to do for his family. He had said it so many times it had smoothed into something he could hold without feeling the edges. But James Reeves was dead. 3 operators were dead. And now Reeves's daughter, who was supposed to be dead, who he had believed was dead for 5 years, was standing on his parade ground. He picked up his phone. He set it down. He picked it up again. "Major Pierce, I need you to do something for me." He gave the instructions in a flat voice. The CQB drill, old equipment, wrong size vest. The kind of scenario that would expose a desk officer's limitations publicly and give him grounds for reassignment before anyone started asking questions. When he hung up, he sat with his hands open on the desk and looked at nothing. He was not a man accustomed to being afraid. He had always believed that the worst moments of a man's life were the ones where he had not yet decided. Once the decision was made, you lived with it and moved forward. He had decided in 2019. He had moved forward for 5 years. He turned off the office light and sat in the dark for a long time. That night, Cord Halloran could not sleep. He lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling and tried to locate the thing that had been moving in the back of his memory since the parade ground that morning. It was not a thought yet. It was a sense recognition at depth, the way a man gets when he has encountered something before in a context stored away where the mind keeps things it has not yet finished processing. He had been in the teams for 15 years. He had been through SEER training twice, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He had learned things there that could not be unlearned. One of them was this: a person who has been through real trauma develops a relationship with pain that differs from ordinary endurance. They do not tolerate pain. They process it as information and continue to function. He had seen that this morning, when Briggs grabbed Maya's collar. Not flinching was one thing. Plenty of people controlled their flinch. What he had seen in Maya was the complete absence of the internal startle that precedes flinching. As if the input had been received, categorized, and set aside without generating the response most nervous systems would generate. As if large man grabbing you from behind had arrived and been processed as manageable. Continue breathing. Nothing here requires action. He had seen that in exactly 2 categories of people: operators who had been through specific programs, and people who had spent enough time in genuinely dangerous situations that danger had become the baseline and the nervous system had recalibrated accordingly. He pulled up the classified database on his laptop. He started searching. Syria Theater 2017 to 2019, covert units, intelligence specialization, female operators, sealed records. The search returned a name, and beside the name a notation that put a cold weight in his chest. Captain Maya Reeves, Iron Veil Intelligence Cell, status killed in action, April 2019. Record sealed. Father Colonel James Reeves, founder, Iron Veil Intelligence Cell, status killed in action, Syria, October 2018. Halloran sat with the laptop on his knees for a long time. He knew the name James Reeves the way any SEAL who had served in the Syria theater between 2015 and 2020 knew it, not from files, but from conversations between people who trusted each other and were trying to understand why certain things worked and certain things failed. Reeves had been, by every account that reached Halloran through those channels, one of the most effective intelligence architects of the decade. His unit had produced actionable intelligence in situations where no intelligence should have been possible. And then in the spring of 2019, the unit had been aborted in circumstances that no one with knowledge of the unit's record could explain, without concluding that something had gone very wrong inside the institution supposed to support them. James Reeves's daughter had been listed as killed in that abort. She was sleeping 2 buildings away. Halloran closed the laptop, lay back, stared at the ceiling. From the deep storage where the mind keeps things it has not finished with, something began to surface. A memory he had not consciously accessed in years, but that had apparently been there all along, waiting for the right key. Mosul 2008. He had been 24 years old, 18 months out of BUD/S, still learning the distance between what training prepared you for and what the fight actually required. A convoy ops support role, 3 vehicles moving through a sector designated low risk by intelligence, 8 days old. The IED had taken the lead vehicle. The blast flipped Halloran's Humvee. He had been pinned under twisted metal with something wrong in his left shoulder and a sound in his ears like the world had changed frequencies, and the smoke was heavy, and he had thought with the clarity that comes in the first seconds of genuine mortal emergency, this is how it ends. Then hands, small hands pulling at the doorframe, finding leverage where there should have been none. A voice calm in a way that had no business being calm in that moment. Stay with me. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. He had followed the counting. It had kept him conscious while the hands worked. He had not seen a face. He had been loaded onto a medevac and had woken in a field hospital, and the official report listed the analyst as a civilian contractor identity redacted for operational security. He had filed an inquiry that went nowhere. 17 years ago, Mosul, not Syria. He had not connected it this morning because the mind does not search that far back unprompted. But now lying in the dark, he heard it clearly. The cadence of those breathing counts, the quality of calm in that voice. And he had heard Maya Reeves breathing that way on the parade ground, not because he had been listening for it, but because it was the same rhythm trained into the body, the same way father to daughter in a backyard in Fayetteville, long before anyone knew what it would be needed for. He would not know for certain, not yet, but in the morning he would find Walsh. In her quarters, Maya lay on her bunk with the lights off and the coin in her hand and breathed. 4 counts in. The ceiling was standard military issue, flat white, inviting the mind to provide its own material. 4 counts held. She thought about her father drawing that hawk at a folding table in Coronado in October 2015, hands moving separately from his mind, filling in detail while the real work happened somewhere else. 4 counts out. She thought about Carver's face when the shirt had torn. She had not looked at him directly. She had been looking at the tree line, breathing, holding herself at the center of where she needed to be. But she had seen him in peripheral vision. The micro-expression that passed across his features when he saw the tattoo was not what she had expected. She had expected mockery. Instead, she had seen something faster and deeper. Recognition. He had known what the hawk meant, or suspected, or feared. Either way, he had understood in the moment the shirt tore that the situation had changed in ways he had not accounted for. That fear, visible for less than a second gone before anyone else could catch it, was the first piece of evidence she had come here to collect. She closed her hand around the coin. Her father had built something worth protecting, worth finishing. 3 men who had trusted him were dead. He was dead. And the person who had sold this was 30 feet from her every day in an office with a wall full of commendations and the confidence of a man who has gotten away with something long enough to believe he always will. She was going to take that confidence apart, piece by piece. Without anger, anger was noise and noise was waste. With patience, with the complete willingness to be underestimated for as long as underestimation served the mission. The coin was warm in her hand now, warmed by her own skin. She set it on the nightstand, closed her eyes. In the morning, the next phase would begin. The gear was waiting at the range table when Maya arrived at 800. She saw it before she reached the table. She had learned years before this morning to see rooms before she entered them, to read the arrangement of objects the way other people read sentences, looking for what the grammar was trying to say. What the grammar said here was deliberate. The rifle was an older M4 variant with a scratched stock and a front sight assembly that had been adjusted or had drifted or had been nudged by someone with an outcome in mind. The tactical vest hanging from the peg was 2 sizes too large. It would hang off her shoulders like a tarp shift, with every movement, drive the stock into the wrong part of her arm on recoil. The earpiece crackled with static before she even touched it. She picked up the rifle, settled it into her hands, pressed her thumb against the receiver just below the rear sight, and registered the wrongness there, a degree or two of cant that most people would not notice, and that some who noticed would not know how to correct for in real time without a test round to calibrate against. Her father had spent 6 weeks teaching her to feel this before he taught her to shoot. He had put her hands on a rifle after rifle in the garage, some correctly sighted and some deliberately off, and made her identify the difference by feel alone. He had said, "The gun doesn't care if you trust it. You shouldn't trust it either. Trust your hands." He had said this so many times that by the time she was 15, she had stopped hearing it as advice and started hearing it as fact, which was what he had intended. She set the rifle down, adjusted the vest as far as the straps would allow, still wrong, still too large, but cinched enough that the shifting would be predictable. She calculated the variables. Misaligned sight 2 degrees right, vest driving the stock wide on recoil. Her grip compensation. She filed all of it and waited. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb approached from the far end of the range. He was the kind of NCO who had been in long enough to be good at masking what he thought, but not at masking that he was masking it. He looked at Maya with the expression of a senior soldier put in an unfair position, not unkind, but already mentally apologizing for what was about to happen. Captain Reeves, he stopped a few feet away. This exercise is advanced. There's no requirement for liaison personnel to participate. If you'd rather observe, I'll manage, she said. He studied her for a moment. Then, yes, ma'am. Corporal Miles Decker was already suited up running a last check on his magazine seating. He was 26 Ranger trained. His skepticism professional rather than personal. He doubted outcomes on evidence, not instinct, which made him more dangerous to underestimate than soldiers who simply didn't think about it. He looked at Maya's vest without expression. He looked at her rifle. He said nothing. The buzzer sounded. They stacked at the entry point. Webb led. Decker took the right. Maya took the rear rifle in low. Ready, the misaligned sight already mapped, the vest already predictable, the broken variables already accounted for. She breathed. 4 counts in, hold. 4 counts out. The door breached. The first room cleared in seconds. 2 threat targets, clean angles, no complications. The team moved as a unit, compact and efficient. The second room was where the drill became something else. The team entered fast. Webb called left, Decker called right. The hidden threat target came up from behind a structural post in the far corner, wedged in a gap that gave Decker a bad angle where a round fired at the target would carry through into the hostage target positioned behind it. Decker's muzzle tracked across the sight line, stopped held. He had made the right call, don't shoot, and in doing so had frozen the room. Webb barked at him to hold and was already trying to reposition. The clock was running, 3 seconds to neutralize or the scenario scored as a failure. Maya moved, not forward, not backward. 2 steps to her right, a lateral shift of 14 inches, changing her angle relative to the threat target by just enough to open a clean line of fire past the post without endangering the hostage. Her rifle came up in the arc of someone for whom this action is not a decision, but a continuation of breathing, smooth, unhurried, absolutely certain. 1 shot. Center mass. The threat target fell. Decker stared at the empty space where the problem had been. Maya was already moving toward the third room. The third room held 4 threats and 2 hostages in a configuration with no clean angles from a standing position. The room, 2 narrow targets, 2 closely spaced hostages, positioned to block natural lines of fire at standard height. Maya dropped to one knee, lower angle, different geometry, new lines of fire that didn't exist from standing. She fired twice. 2 threat targets down, both hostages untouched. The range officer's voice came over the intercom. Flat and factual reading from a screen. Clear. Time 47 seconds. New facility record. A pause. Previous record, 52 seconds, held by a SEAL instructor, 2021. The room was silent. Webb was looking at Maya the way a man looks at something that has rearranged a significant portion of his working assumptions. Decker was looking at his own hands, then at Maya, then at his hands again. Maya ejected the magazine with her left hand. Her right index finger had not flexed correctly since the second room. She had felt it happen, felt the joint take the recoil wrong when the vest shifted on the first shot. She had switched to her middle finger on the trigger for the final 2 shots without breaking pace or expression. She set the rifle on the table, walked toward the exit. Behind her, Sergeant Ray Holt, 8 years running this range, stood with his clipboard held still against his side for the first time in anyone's memory. In the observation booth above the range, Walsh watched the footage rewind for the second time. He had arrived before Halloran and had been standing in the dark with the technician for 6 minutes watching the same 47 seconds from angles he kept asking to be rotated. Halloran arrived while the footage was playing. He stood beside Walsh and watched without speaking. When it finished, Walsh said, "Freeze it there." On the screen, Maya at the moment of the corner shot, her stance, the position of her elbows, the precise angle of her head relative to the misaligned sight. Halloran leaned forward. He was quiet for a long time. Then quietly, "That's JSOC, Advanced CQB technique." The lateral movement, the way she indexed off the door frame to compensate for the sight error that is taught in exactly 1 course, and it is not open to liaison officers with desk assignments. Walsh, look at the right hand. Halloran looked. The freeze frame showed Maya's right index finger at an unmistakable angle, bent wrong at the joint, the knuckle slightly larger than the left. "She broke it in the second room," Walsh said, when the vest shifted on her first shot. "You can see the recoil pattern." She switched to the middle finger on the trigger and continued. Halloran stood back. He processed this. Then, She compensated for a broken finger and a misaligned sight simultaneously in a timed exercise, and still set a facility record. Walsh said nothing. He was looking at the screen, at the image of Maya's hands. "I need to access her file," Halloran said. "The real one, Missy." Walsh looked at him. "I think you'll want to talk to me first. Before you pull the file." He paused. "I served with her father." Halloran turned. "James Reeves," Walsh said. "He told me he had a child, that she'd come when she was ready, that she'd know who to trust when she got there." He looked at the frozen image on screen. "I think this is what ready looks like." Private First Class Danny Calloway was 20 years old, 3 months out of basic and trying too hard to look comfortable on the obstacle course. He hit the climbing wall at full speed, which was his habit and his flaw. The wall was 17 feet, the handhold standard, the technique straightforward for a man who had cleared it a dozen times before. On the 12th foot, his left hand hit a grip that had been loosened by the morning's rain. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough that the friction was not where he expected it. His weight shifted wrong. His right hand grabbed at nothing. He fell 11 feet onto packed gravel, and the sound of the impact reached Walsh and Maya at the same moment from different distances with the same result. Walsh was 40 yards away and moving immediately. Maya was 8 feet away because she had been crossing from the equipment shed to the water station and had stopped when she heard the approach of something wrong in the rhythm of his feet on the wall. She covered 8 feet before Walsh had processed and begun moving from 40 yards. She was on her knees beside Calloway before the echoes finished. His left leg was broken. Not cleanly. The tibia had fractured in a way that made wrong angles visible through his training pants, and there was blood, and his face was the gray-white of someone whose nervous system has been handed more information than it knows what to do with. He was starting to spiral. She could see it, the eyes going unfocused, the breathing fragmenting the internal collapse that precedes shock when no one intervenes. She intervened. "Calloway, look at me." His eyes found her face, held it. Something in the way she said it, not loud, not urgent, simply factual in the manner of someone who has been here before and knows the map pulled him back from the edge of the place he was heading. "Breathe with me. 4 counts in." She demonstrated. He tried to follow, chest hitching. She waited. 4 counts out, again. His breathing began to regularize. Not calm, you do not get calm when your tibia is broken in a field, but functional. Controlled enough to work with. She was already reaching into her cargo pocket. The kit was there where it had been for 6 years, not the standard issue first aid pouch, but a personal trauma kit in green and tan packaging, with a lot number from 2018. Nitrile gloves, combat gauze, a SAM splint, a tourniquet she would not need, but had, because not needing it and not having it are two different situations. She snapped the gloves and over both hands, the right index finger stiff but functional, and looked at the injury the way a mechanic looks at a problem clinically without reaction, identifying what needs to happen in what order. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I need you to keep breathing. Can you do that?" Calloway's jaw was set hard. He was 20 years old and trying to be a soldier about something that would have broken older men's composure. He nodded. "Good. That's the hard part. Everything else is mechanics." She worked. The gauze packing went in clean, applied with pressure that stops hemorrhage without doing additional damage. Not a guess, not a rough approximation, but the pressure of someone who has calculated this before in situations where being wrong had immediate consequences. She talked while she worked, not to comfort him, but to keep his nervous system oriented, to give it something to process that was not pain. "You're at approximately 7% blood loss," she said. "The threshold for hemodynamic instability is 15. You have a wide margin. Your body is managing this. Keep breathing." The numbers helped him. She knew they would. Numbers are concrete when everything else has become abstract. Numbers can be held onto. She stabilized the fracture with the SAM splint, immobilizing the break without applying pressure to the wound site. Then she took out a radio that was not the standard training unit. Smaller with a different antenna configuration, the kind of device that did not appear on any equipment manifest for this installation. She keyed the mic and delivered a 9-line medevac request in the clipped sequenced format that field medics use when the helicopter is the difference between a soldier keeping his leg and losing it. Line 1 grid coordinates precise to the meter. Line 2 radio frequency for the landing zone. Line 3 1 patient urgent surgical. Line 4 equipment required litter. On through 9, 40 seconds. Every piece of information in exact format, without hesitation, without reference to any written guide. The delivery that comes from repetition, not of this scenario, but of real ones. Walsh arrived at the 90-second mark. He stood at the edge of the loose ring of trainees and officers who had drifted over and now stood at a distance watching. He looked at Maya's hands, at the gauze packaging on the gravel, at the radio she was holding. The helicopter arrived 7 minutes later. The lead paramedic knelt beside Calloway, assessed the stabilization, looked at the wound packing and splint placement, and was quiet for a moment. "Who did this?" someone pointed. The paramedic looked at Maya. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 16 years. That is textbook TCC. Where did you train?" Maya was peeling off her right glove, careful with the index finger. "He did the hard part," she said. "He kept breathing." She walked away from the ring of people before anyone could ask a follow-up question. Walsh picked up a discarded glove wrapper from the gravel, turned it over. The lot number put manufacture at 2018. She had been carrying this kit for 6 years. 6 years in circumstances where she might need it at any moment, without warning, in places where the official medic was not going to arrive in time. He looked at the space where she had been. He thought, "James, what did you build?" He thought, "I know exactly what you built." That night, Halloran opened the classified database with his JSOC liaison credentials and ran the search he had been composing in his mind since the range. Iron Veil Intelligence Cell, Syria and Iraq Theater 2017 to 2019. Covert Reconnaissance and Direct Action, female operator. Signals Intelligence and Cryptography Specialization. Sealed records. One name, Captain Maya Reeves. Status killed in action, April 2019. Records sealed. Father Colonel James Reeves, founder, Iron Veil Intelligence Cell. Status killed in action, Syria, October 2018. He sat with this. Then he clicked deeper into the linked operational files. He found the Iron Veil abort order dated April 12, 2019. 2 days before the abort, the unit had been 48 hours from capturing an arms dealer named Viktor Sorokin, whose network had been funding irregular force operations across 3 countries. The abort order cited intelligence compromise, leaked position, enemy forces alerted. Standard language for a reasonable operational decision. Except there was no supporting documentation, no source citation, no recorded intelligence briefing, no analyst assessment. The order existed as a standalone document signed by a single officer referencing intelligence that appeared nowhere else in any file Halloran could access. He looked at the name on the signature line, Colonel Dennis Carver. He ran a secondary search abort orders and mission cancellations across the Syria and Iraq theaters, 2017 to 2019, cross-referenced by authorizing officer. 7 of 11 relevant operations had Carver's signature. 6 of the 7 cited intelligence compromise. 5 of the 6 had no supporting documentation. Pattern is not proof. Halloran knew this, but a pattern that compelled investigation was exactly what this was. He escalated his access request to JSOC Operations Command. His phone rang 11 minutes later. "Commander Halloran, this is Captain Marsh, JOC Operations. You flagged a file sealed at the highest classification level for 5 years. Are you prepared to document the basis for your concern?" "Yes," Halloran said. "I believe one of the operators listed as killed in action in that file is currently active at Fort Bragg under a cover identity. And I believe she is here because the officer who authorized her unit's abort order is the installation's commanding officer." Silence. Then, "Stay available. Do not discuss this further with non-essential personnel. We are initiating a review." The line went dead. He walked to Walsh's quarters and knocked. Walsh was awake, reading light on. He opened the door and said, "Come in." They sat, Walsh in the desk chair, Halloran on the edge of the bunk. Halloran said, "Her father founded the unit." "Yes," Walsh said. "You knew him." 6 years. "We served in the same theater rotation in 2013 and 2014. He requested me for the Iron Veil support cadre in 2016. I declined. I had obligations here." He understood. Walsh paused. "He told me he had a daughter, one child. He said she understood his work in a way that almost no one else did. He said if something happened to him, she would find her own way, that she would know when she was ready." Halloran. "She's been planning this since 2019. "At the earliest," Walsh said, "possibly since her father died." Halloran was quiet. "The way she breathes," he said finally. "The counting. Where did that come from?" Walsh looked at him carefully. "James used it. I saw him use it in the field when things were close. He said he learned it from his father, who was a surgeon. The idea that controlled breath is the first instrument of controlled action." He looked at Halloran. "Why, all right." Halloran looked at his hands. "Mosul, 2008. I was 24, a convoy op. The lead vehicle hit an IED. My Humvee flipped. I was pinned, losing blood, not going to make it out on my own." He paused. A civilian analyst pulled me out, small, calm in a way that had no business being calm in that situation. She counted breath to keep me conscious. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. I never saw her face clearly. The report listed her as a civilian contractor. Identity redacted. Walsh was very still. Maya would have been 16 in 2008, Halloran said. 16, Walsh said quietly. It wasn't her, Halloran said. The timing is wrong. It wasn't her, Walsh agreed. Then after a moment, but James spent time in Mosul in 2007 and 2008, in civilian cover. He was not always listed by his real name or rank. He paused. The breathing cadence he taught his daughter, she would have carried it. They sat with this. There are moments in an investigation where a connection arrives not as a conclusion, but as a widening, where the picture does not become clearer, but larger, and the largeness itself tells you something important about how far back the roots go. I found Carver's signature on 6 abort orders with no supporting documentation, Halloran said. Iron Veil is the 7th. Walsh nodded slowly. He had not known the specifics. He had known the shape. Tomorrow, Halloran said, something else is going to happen, and I'm going to watch her the way I should have been watching her from the beginning. Walsh looked at him. You were watching her. You recognized her posture on the parade ground before I said anything. Halloran acknowledged this with a slight nod. He had been watching. He had just not yet known what he was seeing. Specialist Owen Greer had been ill since 0300 food poisoning, the nurse said, from something in the evening meal that had agreed with no one else at his table. In the immediate term, this meant one thing: the cryptographer was unavailable. The encrypted message had arrived from a forward unit in Poland at 1347. It contained targeting coordinates for a live drone exercise scheduled for 1600. The message needed to be decoded, verified, and transmitted to the exercise coordinator by 1407, 20 minutes. Headquarters said they could send a replacement cryptographer from the Signals Battalion. ETA 45 minutes, 25 minutes too late. Carver saw the situation and summoned Maya to the communications center. The room held 16 people when she walked in, not because 16 people needed to be there, because Shaw had been in the corridor when the summons went out and had 14 minutes to circulate the word that the liaison officer was about to fail spectacularly in public. Maya stood in the doorway and read the room. She did not look at Carver. She looked at the encrypted text on the main screen of blocks of letters and numbers arranged in segments with a timestamp embedded in the header structure. Every cipher reflects the thinking of its author. The choice of base algorithm, the structure of the key rotation, the way the timestamp is embedded, all of it reflects the training of the person who built the system. If you can read the training, you can read the cipher. Her father had taught her this at a kitchen table in Fayetteville with graph paper and coffee on a Saturday morning. She said very quietly to no one in particular, Caesar variant, rotating key, timestamp seed. Shaw standing 3 feet away. What? She pulled a chair to the keyboard, took out a pen and a folded sheet of paper from her breast pocket. Old habit. Certain mathematical work moves faster with a pen, the physical act of writing and engaging pattern recognition differently than typing. Her hand began to move, fast in the way of someone whose speed is not acceleration, but baseline. The room was quiet. The clock moved. 8 minutes passed, then 10. At the 11-minute mark, Maya stopped writing. She read back what she had on the paper twice. Then she typed a long string of text into the decryption field and pressed enter. The screen cleared. Clean text appeared. Coordinates, instructions, mission parameters, complete and correct. Transmit to the exercise coordinator, Maya said to the technician. She handed the paper to Shaw and walked out. Shaw looked at the paper. Both sides. On the front, a page of calculations dense enough that he could not follow the structure without knowing where to start. Cipher wheels, frequency analysis. Key derivation steps written in the handwriting of someone for whom these operations were as natural as arithmetic. He turned the page over. In the upper right corner, barely visible, written small almost by reflex, the way a person writes their own name on a document without thinking, 2 letters and a number. IV-7. He stood with the paper for a long moment. Then he photographed it and sent it to Walsh with a single line, found this on Reeves's work. What does it mean? Walsh saw the message. He read it twice. He felt the thing he had been carrying since the bathroom mirror 2 nights ago settle into a different position, closer to the surface. No longer just the weight of suspicion, but something more specific and more final. He forwarded the photo to Halloran. Cross-reference your database search against this. Halloran opened the image, zoomed in. IV-7. He pulled up the operational file. There it was, operator call signs, Iron Veil Intelligence Cell, 2018 to 2019. Iron Veil 7, SIGINT, and cryptography. He escalated his access request again with an added flag active personnel concerned potential identity discrepancy. His phone rang 11 minutes later. Commander Halloran, you've flagged a file sealed at the highest classification level for 5 years. Are you prepared to document the basis for your concern? Yes, Halloran said. I believe one of the operators listed as killed in action in that file is currently active at Fort Bragg under a cover identity. And I believe she is here because the officer who authorized her unit's abort order is the installation's commanding officer. Silence. Then, stay available. We are sending a team. Halloran sat with the phone in his hand. Then he pulled the laptop back open and went to the section of the abort order file listing the operational outcome. 3 operators' status changed from active to killed in action, April 14th, 2019. 1 operator status changed from active to killed in action, April 14th, 2019. That 4th entry was Maya Reeves. The death record was sparse, no body recovery, no confirmation from field personnel, just presumed KYA following extraction failure, records sealed per directive of authorizing officer. The authorizing officer of the seal was Carver. He had signed the abort order, then he had signed the seal on the outcome. He had written the ending himself and waited 5 years for it to hold. In Carver's office on the other side of the installation, the colonel was reviewing next week's training schedule when Pierce sent him the photograph of IV-7 on the corner of Maya's decryption sheet. He read the 2 letters and the number 3 times. He set the phone face down on the desk. He had told himself for 5 years that the decision he made was one any man might make, that the love of a father for a child was a force that could not be weighed fairly against abstractions like duty and honor and the safety of operators he had never met. He might even have been right about that in the abstract. It did not help. What had broken him slowly over 5 years was the understanding that the money he had accepted had not appeared from nowhere, that it came from a network funding the deaths of other men's sons, other men's daughters, in other vehicles, in other corridors, on other mornings. That the chain connecting his choice to those deaths was longer than he could see from where he stood, but was a chain nonetheless, and he was a link in it. He had been a soldier for 26 years before 2019. He had been a different man. He picked up his phone and made a call. He should not have made the call of a man who has run out of better options and is trying to buy time by eliminating the thing shortening it. He did not know the call was being logged. He did not know that 2 buildings away, the trap had already closed around him. He only knew that in the morning, there would be one more thing to try. Maya sat on the edge of her bunk that night and looked at her right hand. The index finger was splinted now. She had done it herself in the bathroom with the last of the SAM splint material. It would heal. The joint would be stiff for a few weeks, and then mostly what it had been, which is the nature of small fractures versus large ones. She rotated it carefully, filed the range of motion, adjusted. On the nightstand, the challenge coin sat in the half-light from the corridor. She had not picked it up since the night before. She had been leaving it there deliberately as a test of herself to see if the weight of a day like today would make her reach for it. She had not reached for it. She thought about Danny Calloway on a surgical table somewhere, his leg held together with the work of a surgeon who had called her field stabilization graduate-level care. She thought about the gratitude in his eyes when she told him to breathe with her raw, immediate true. She thought about how her father had told her that the moments that cost the most were often the ones that gave the most back. Not a trade or a compensation. Simply the nature of doing something real in the world. She was building a case. Not just against a man, but against the machinery that had allowed him to function. A device smaller than her thumbnail sewn into the lining of her jacket before she arrived had been recording every conversation since day one, every order to sabotage her equipment, every coordination between Carver and Pierce. Each act logged, each act recorded, each act building the pattern. Tomorrow there would be one more thing. He was running out of subtle options, which meant it would be less subtle than what had come before. Less subtle meant more visible. More visible meant more evidence. She lay back, closed her eyes, 4 counts in. In the morning she would be ready. The briefing for the extraction drill arrived at 0600 on the 7th day, delivered by Major Owen Pierce, with the efficiency of a man performing a task he has been given rather than chosen. The scenario on paper: Maya and 4 trainees would locate and extract a high-value target from a mock compound in the old warehouse complex at the eastern edge of the training area. Enemy resistance listed as light, 4 to 6 role-players. Estimated completion time 15 minutes. The map Pierce handed out showed a two-story structure with a standard room configuration. 3 entry points, 2 interior hallways, a staircase on the north end. Maya looked at the map for 12 seconds. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket and did not look at it again. Corporal Ryan Briggs was team leader. He had been assigned this role because Pierce needed someone physically dominant at the front. Briggs had spent the past 6 days absorbing a lesson he had not yet fully processed, that he had been an instrument in something, and that instruments do not choose what they are used for but are responsible for what they do, regardless. She had watched him in the mess hall the night before, eating slowly, saying less than usual, wearing the expression of a man facing an accounting that he had been putting off. She did not hold it against him. She was not here to adjudicate the choices of junior enlisted men who followed orders from colonels. The team assembled at the warehouse door at 0700. Briggs briefed the plan with the directness of someone who understood the plan would not survive contact. Simple smash and grab. We breach, clear 3 rooms, locate the HVT extract. Light resistance. 15 minutes. Miles Decker checked his magazine. Private First Class Calloway was still in the field hospital. 2 other trainees had taken his slot: Private First Class Novak, 22, quiet, capable, and Specialist Hayes, 24, who performed well when structure was intact and struggled when it dissolved. Maya loaded her magazine, checked the rifle, checked the vest, checked the standard training radio on her vest. She knew it was going to fail. She had the secondary in her left cargo pocket, where it had been since she arrived at Fort Bragg 8 days ago. She breathed. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out. Briggs counted them down. The door breached. Inside the warehouse was not the warehouse on the map. She understood this in the first 2 seconds before anyone else processed it, because she was looking for the discrepancy rather than assuming the correspondence. The interior had been reconfigured, a false wall added to the first corridor, rerouting the approach. The staircase shown on the north end was on the south end. There was an extra room that should not exist, and the hallway leading to it was narrow, in a way that funneled the team into single-file formation and removed their tactical advantage immediately. She said nothing. The team moved. They cleared the first room cleanly. The second room was where it became something else entirely. 4 role players came from 2 directions simultaneously. Novak took 3 rounds to the chest. In the accounting of the drill, he was dead. Hayes took 2 to the back when he turned to check the corridor behind them. Decker's rifle jammed. The magazine had been improperly seated, which was not his fault and was not an accident. He cleared the jam in 4 seconds, which was excellent, but 4 seconds in a room with 4 active threats is a long time. Briggs took a round to the right shoulder. He kept moving, but his arm dropped, and a man with 1 useful arm and a rifle is making difficult calculations about which hand to trust. The radio was jammed. Maya had known it would be. The HVT was somewhere on the 2nd floor, unfound. 2 of her team were down. 1 was compromised, 1 was dry. The role players there were 10 of them, not 6, were converging from 3 directions in the systematic way of people who have been told where to stand and when to move. This was not a drill that had gone wrong. This was a drill built to produce a specific outcome. She stood in the center of the ground floor and made the assessment in the time it takes to exhale. Then she reached into her left cargo pocket. The radio was smaller than the training unit, matte black, with a frequency range that did not correspond to anything on the standard equipment manifest for this installation. She had carried it for 4 years. She had used it twice before this moment, both times in circumstances where using it meant she was out of options. Both times it had meant exactly what it meant now. She keyed the mic. Her voice changed. Not dramatically louder, not harder in the way of someone performing authority. It changed the way a key changes a lock. A complete final engagement. The voice of a person who has been something else for days and is now briefly and without ceremony exactly what they are. Iron Veil 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract. Grid November Whiskey 4721. 5 personnel, 1 HVT. Authenticate Tango Hotel November. Silence. 1 second. 2. Then a voice, calm, professional, flat, in the manner of someone for whom this frequency represents work rather than emergency. Iron Veil 7. Authentication confirmed. QRF inbound. ET, 890 seconds. Briggs stood with his compromised arm and his paint-stained shoulder and looked at her the way a man looks at something that has reorganized a significant portion of his working assumptions. His mouth was slightly open. He was searching for a sentence and not finding one. The role players had stopped moving. They were looking at each other with the expression of people who have been given a script and have just heard something that was not in it. The door came in at 93 seconds. 4 men in full tactical kit entered with the economy of people who do not practice this but perform it. No unit markings on their gear. No identifying patches. They moved through the room in the time it takes to say their names, and the role players cleared without being asked twice, and the HVT was located on the second floor and secured and moving in under 2 minutes. The lead operator passed Maya on the way to the exit. He looked at her once, a glance carrying recognition between people who have worked in the same spaces without formally meeting, and nodded. Then they were gone. The warehouse was quiet. Paint residue hung in the air. Briggs stood in the center of the room, arm at his side, paint drying on his shoulder, looking at the door where the operators had exited. Then he looked at Maya. She had holstered her sidearm, standing with her weight balanced, right hand loose at her side, the broken index finger wrapped tight. She was looking at her team with an expression that was not quite what they had seen from her all week. The careful surface was still there, but underneath it, something else was present. Not warmth exactly, recognition. The quality of a person seeing other people clearly after a long time of being careful about what she allowed herself to see. "Debrief," she said. Not loud, not aggressive. Final. Now. They followed her out. In the command center, Walsh and Halloran watched the footage on the main screen. Walsh had been in the room for 11 minutes before the extraction drills ended, watching in silence as the scenario unfolded, feeling the thing he had been carrying for 8 days arrive at its destination. Halloran had come in during the radio transmission. When Maya said Iron Veil 7 to Overwatch, Walsh pressed pause. He held the footage frozen on her face at the moment the surface dropped away and what was underneath became visible, if only for the duration of a sentence. He had heard recordings of James Reeves running operations communications, briefing tapes, after-action audio. He had listened to them over the years the way a man listens to the voice of someone he respected and missed. The compression of urgency into professional calm. The cadence that came from absolute certainty about what needed to happen in the next 30 seconds. He had just heard its daughter. He turned off the screen. Halloran stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. James used to say, Walsh said finally, that the work outlasts the worker, that the only question worth asking is whether you built something strong enough to carry forward without you. He looked at his coffee. I used to think he was talking about operations, doctrine, institutional knowledge. Halloran waited. He was talking about her. Outside, the perimeter lights held their flat circles on the ground. A sentry completed his route along the fence and started it again. Halloran, JOC operations called this morning. General Harmon is already on a plane. Walsh looked at him. She knew the family, Halloran said. She served with James Reeves in the early years. She has been waiting for someone to flag this file. Walsh picked up his coffee. It had gone cold while he was watching the footage. He drank it anyway. Then it is almost done, he said. General Patricia Harmon arrived at 0600 the following morning. 54 years old, gray hair, 2 Purple Hearts. A manner that had spent 30 years becoming indistinguishable from its surroundings. She looked like what a senior officer was supposed to look like until she spoke, at which point the appearance became the least of her. She had known James Reeves since 2011. She said nothing about him when she arrived. She walked through the command center, reviewed the footage and the financial records and the communications log Halloran had assembled, and then sat with Walsh for 40 minutes in a room with the door closed and emerged with the expression of someone who has confirmed a shape they already knew. She had Carver summoned at 0900, no explanation given. The briefing room held Harmon at the head of the table, 2 SOC investigators who had arrived on the same plane, Halloran and Walsh at the side and Carver at the far end. He sat without being asked, as if his body had already begun making concessions his mind had not yet authorized. Harmon looked at him. She began with a question, not an accusation. Colonel Carver, the Iron Veil abort order, April 12, 2019. Walk me through the intelligence assessment that prompted it. Carver's hands were flat on the table. Enemy forces had been alerted to our position. I received intelligence indicating the operation was compromised. From which source? Confidential. I was not required to. The source does not appear in any file, Halloran said. Not as a reference, not as a redaction placeholder. The documentation does not exist. I made a judgment call on time-sensitive intelligence. 3 operators died in that extraction, Harmon said. Her voice held the same temperature throughout. Not cold implies the effort of suppression. Simply even. Because air support was redirected without warning. Because exfiltration assets were pulled from staging without notification to the ground team. Carver said nothing. Colonel James Reeves died 6 months later. Harmon continued, on a mission assessed at the wrong threat level because the intelligence infrastructure his cell had built was dismantled when Iron Veil was shut down. Intelligence that would have changed the threat picture that killed him. The room was very quiet. Walsh had not looked at Carver since the meeting began. He was looking at the morning light through the window where it came through at a low angle and made long shadows across the floor. He was doing what he had done in difficult rooms for 32 years, remaining still, costing nothing widening. The door opened. Maya walked in. She had not been summoned. She had known from the moment Harmon's plane landed and the command center moved with the controlled rhythm that precedes a formal proceeding that today was the day. She had spent the previous night reviewing her recordings and organizing the sequence in which she intended to deliver them. She carried a digital recorder and a manila folder. She set both on the table without ceremony. She did not look at Carver, she looked at Harmon. "General," she said, "I'd like to submit a full record." Harmon nodded once. Maya opened the folder. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, faded at the creases where it had been folded and refolded many times. The paper thickened at the edges in the way of something carried for a long time against a body. She placed it on the table in front of Carver. "My father wrote this letter to the JSOC Inspector General on March 15th, 2019, she said, 3 weeks before he was killed. He listed specific anomalies in the abort order he had received and requested a formal investigation into possible internal compromise." She paused. The letter was intercepted before it reached the IG's office. It was archived without acknowledgement. He never knew it had been stopped. He died not knowing who had sold his operation. She looked at Carver now, directly, for the first time since she had arrived at Fort Bragg. "But he knew something was wrong," she said. "He put it in writing. He just didn't know who." Carver looked at the letter. The handwriting of a man he had known professionally for 6 years, the specific pressure and lean of James Reeves's hand on paper, the way he had always held a pen with more force than the task required. He read the first paragraph. The words were measured, careful, the language of a man who understood that what he was writing needed to survive scrutiny. He had constructed his case the way he constructed everything, methodically, without waste. He did not read further. He set the page down. He sat back in the slow way of a man whose body has decided before his mind that it is finished. He had known this letter existed. He had known for 5 years that Reeves had understood something was wrong, had written it down, had tried to send it somewhere it could do damage. He had known and had told himself the seal held. The seal had held for 5 years. He did not speak. He did not deny. He looked at the table in front of him, at the handwriting of a man he had sold for $200,000, and what crossed his face was not the performance of remorse, but something older and quieter, the recognition of a man who has finally run out of the particular distance he had been maintaining between himself and what he had done. He had a daughter, Carver said, not to anyone, not a defense. A man saying aloud a fact he had known for 5 years and never been able to fully absorb. The daughter had been a piece of information in his calculation, not a person. He understood now, sitting in this room with her on the other side of the table, that this had been a failure of a particular kind, not of courage, not of intellect, but of imagination. He had not been able to imagine her. "He did," Walsh said from the door. He and Halloran had moved to the threshold during Maya's entrance, stepping back naturally without discussion to the position of men who understand that this moment belongs to someone else. Harmon looked at the 2 investigators. They nodded. She looked at Carver. "Colonel Carver, you are relieved of command pending formal investigation. Military police are waiting outside. You will surrender your credentials and accompany them." Carver stood slowly. He looked in this moment less like the officer who had commanded the parade ground 8 days ago than what he actually was, a man of 61 who had made a decision in a parking garage in 2019 and had been living inside it ever since, building walls around it, and whose walls had finally given way, not because they were torn down, but because the person who had built the thing inside them came and stood in front of him and was real. The MPs entered. Carver went with them without resistance, the last decision of a man who had run out of alternatives, made with the same flat resolution as all the others. The door closed. The room breathed. Harmon looked at Maya for a long moment, the look of a woman who had known James Reeves, had mourned him, had kept the sealed file in the place where she kept things that were not finished. She let the silence be what it was. "Then your methods were irregular." Maya: "Yes, ma'am." "They were also effective." "Yes, ma'am." Harmon looked at the recorder on the table. "How long?" "Every conversation since I arrived. Every order to sabotage my equipment. Every coordination between Carver and Pierce." Maya paused. Cross-referenced with the financial records Commander Halloran pulled, it establishes a pattern of deliberate targeting tied to consciousness of guilt. The abort order documentation combined with the letter and the payments establishes motive and mechanism. One of the investigators leaned forward. The network doesn't end with Carver. No, Maya said, it doesn't. How far? 3 more, Ramstein Air Base. Logistics officers and a contracting official. They processed the payments and facilitated the intelligence transfers. Carver was the decision maker. They were the mechanism. She paused. They're still operational. The investigator looked at Harmon. Harmon looked at Maya. Phase 2, Harmon said. It was not a question. Maya nodded once. Pierce was taken into custody at 1100. The group chat Shaw had created 8 days ago dissolved without announcement, the way certain things dissolve when the structure underneath them is removed. Briggs deleted it at 1103. He did not tell anyone he had done this. He simply did it. Maya was in the small conference room off the barracks corridor at 1400 when Briggs knocked. She had known he was coming. She had watched him move through the morning with the expression of a man working towards something he would rather not do, but understood he needed to, which was its own kind of courage. He opened the door and stood in the frame and looked at her directly, which was not the easy part. Captain Reeves, I owe you an apology. His voice was steady. He had thought about this. What I did on the parade ground, I followed an order I should have questioned. I didn't question it because it was easier not to and because I had already decided what you were before I had any information to base that on. He met her eyes. That's on me, not the order. Me. I will testify to everything Carver instructed me to do, every conversation, everything Pierce told me about your assignment. Maya looked at him for a moment, this large, serious man standing in a doorway with nothing to offer except the acknowledgement itself, which was the only thing of actual value available. You were a soldier following orders from a superior officer, she said. That's a context. It's not an excuse. But I hear what you're saying. Briggs nodded. He started to turn away. Then he stopped. Your father, he said. He had done some reading. Colonel James Reeves, Iron Veil. He looked at her. He built something worth protecting. Maya held his gaze for a moment. Yes, she said. He did. Briggs left. The door closed quietly behind him. She sat alone in the room for a few minutes. Outside, the sounds of the installation continuing its business, vehicles, distant drills, the background hum of a place that does not stop for any individual event. She had spent 8 days inside this sound, using it as cover, moving through it with the patience of someone who understood that the mission required time and that time required endurance. There is a cost to this kind of work that is not measured in injuries. It is measured in the sustained effort of being smaller than you are, of folding yourself into a shape that fits what the situation requires rather than what you actually occupy. She had done it before. She would do it again. But it cost what it cost, and she did not pretend otherwise. General Harmon was waiting in the main conference room at 1700. She had the posture of a woman who has been in rooms like this enough times that the furniture has become neutral. The JSOC Inspector General has opened a full investigation based on the evidence you submitted, Harmon said. The financial irregularities have been flagged for the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. It will take time, but it will be thorough. Maya nodded. The formal documentation of Iron Veil's operational record is being initiated. Your father's role, the operators who were lost, it will be entered into the permanent record with appropriate recognition. She paused. They have been in a sealed file for 5 years. That is long enough. Maya said nothing. She was looking at the window. Outside, the Fort Bragg afternoon was moving through its ordinary rhythms. The sky, the flat gray of a Carolina October that looks like it is deciding whether to commit to something. There is a position available, Harmon said. SERRE school, instructor. You have the training, the operational experience, and something that cannot be taught. You have been through what you will be preparing other people for. You would not have to be invisible anymore. Maya looked at her. I appreciate the offer, General. Her voice was even, not cold, simply factual. But I'm not done. Harmon held her gaze for a moment. She had expected this. Perhaps she had offered the position to hear the refusal to confirm what she already knew. Ramstein, she said, yes, ma'am. Your father would have made the same choice. Maya did not respond to this. Not because it was not true, it was true, and they both knew it. But some things do not require acknowledgement to be real. She had learned this from the man being referenced. She nodded. Harmon nodded. That was the entirety of it. She called her mother at 2200. The last call before departure, the promise renewed one more time The same words in the same order, because the words were not the point. The point was the voice, her mother's voice, thin with distance and warm with the worry that does not announce itself. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Maya said. "I'm heading out in the morning. I'll call you from Germany." A pause, the kind that holds more than it releases. "Come home," her mother said. "I will," Maya said. "I promise." She set the phone down. The promise was the same one she had made every night for 5 years. It was the only promise she had never once considered breaking. She packed in 11 minutes. The habit of efficiency had been with her long enough that she no longer thought about it. She simply moved, placing what was necessary and leaving what was not, filling the bag with the clean logic of someone who knows exactly what the next phase requires. At the nightstand, she paused. The challenge coin sat in the small pool of lamplight. She had carried it since October 2018. She had carried it through Syria and through the months of recovery and through 2 years of building the investigation and through 8 days at Fort Bragg of being exactly what she needed to be. She had carried it as debt and as compass and as the weight of what was unfinished. She picked it up one last time. The hawk on one face. IV 07114 on the other. The metal warm from the lamp edges, worn to the texture of something held 10,000 times by hands that needed to hold it. Her father had pressed it into her hand in a field hospital outside Aleppo with what strength he had left and said one word. He had said, "Finish it." She had taken that to mean the mission, the accountability, the network that had sold his operation. And it did mean those things. But sitting here, she understood for the first time that he had also meant something else, that finishing it included this being done with hiding, being done with the sustained performance of smallness, arriving at the other side of what the work required and being again recognizably herself. She set the coin back down. She had not planned to leave it. The decision arrived in the moment with the clarity of something that has been true for a while before it is recognized. Her father's debt was not finished, Ramstein remained, and whatever came after Ramstein. But something had been completed here. The man who had signed the abort order was gone. The sealed file was being opened. The 3 operators who died in April of 2019 would be recognized in the permanent record. James Reeves had built something worth protecting. His daughter had protected it. This part was done. The coin could stay. In this room, in this post where Walsh kept a photograph in a shoebox, and where James Reeves had once written a man's name on the back of a photograph and called him the only one he trusted. The coin belonged to the place where his work had been vindicated. In the corridor outside, Walsh was standing with a cup of coffee when she came out. He had not been in the meeting with Harmon. He had not needed to be. His part in what came next was not operational. It was something smaller and in its way more permanent. He reached into his jacket, took out the photograph from the shoebox, the Coronado image, October 2015, the flat Pacific sky, James Reeves standing to Walsh's left with the smile of a man who has already considered most situations. He held it out. She took it. She looked at it for a long time. Her father was 42 years old in this photograph. He looked older the way of a man who has been spending himself on something real. She had not seen this photograph before, had not known it existed. She turned it over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, the loops and pressure she had known her entire life. Coronado, October 2015. Walsh, the only one here I trust. She looked at it for a long time. She had spent 5 years carrying the weight of his last instruction without knowing who was at the other end of the network he had built, who the people were that he had trusted enough to mention in an unguarded moment, who would recognize what she was carrying the moment she appeared. She had found Walsh in the back row of a parade ground on day 1. He had found her at the same moment. She set the photograph on the table beside her. She would take it with her. Walsh said, "He told me the last time we spoke that he had a daughter who understood his work better than he understood it himself." He paused. "He said she would know when she was ready, and she would know who to trust." Maya held the photograph. She did not speak. She was looking at her father's handwriting, at the 7 words he had written about Walsh, at the evidence that the network of trust he had built was wider and more patient and more intact than she had known. Walsh nodded once. He turned and walked back down the corridor. She stood for a moment after he left. Then she put the photograph in the inner pocket of her jacket against her sternum, where the challenge coin had been for 5 years. She shouldered her bag, walked out of the barracks. The Fort Bragg night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that sharpens the edges of things, the perimeter lights casting their flat, working light across the motor pool. In the parade ground, in the building where 8 days ago, a man had torn her shirt and she had stood completely still and breathed and waited for the first move to become evidence. She started the vehicle, pulled out of the lot, Stopped at the gate while the overnight guard cleared her out, a young soldier, early 20s, doing an honorable and unglamorous job. He checked her credentials without particular interest and raised the barrier. She drove east on Gruber Road toward the airfield. The base lights shrank in the rearview mirror, then were gone. Walsh was at his window with a fresh cup of coffee. He had woken at 04:15 and stood at the window without understanding why, and at 4:32 he had seen headlights move through the gate and east on Gruber Road, and he watched until the lights were gone. Halloran appeared in the doorway behind him, quiet in a way that was not a skill, but in nature the silence of a man who has learned to move through spaces without disturbing them. "She left the coin," Halloran said. "I know. She's been carrying it since 2018. "Yes." They were quiet with this. "She left the coin," Walsh said after a while, "because this part is finished. Not the mission, this part." He looked at his coffee. "James used to say that the work outlasts the worker. I used to think he was talking about doctrine, institutional knowledge, things that get written down." He paused. He wasn't. He was talking about her. Halloran looked at the window where the headlights had been. "She'll finish it," he said. "Yes," Walsh said. "She will." The base held its breath before dawn. The perimeter lights made their flat circles on the ground. A sentry walked his route along the fence line, completed it, began again. Walsh set his coffee cup on the windowsill. He would go to the empty room in the morning. He would collect the coin and put it with the photograph in the shoebox. Not to keep to hold the way certain things need to be held by someone who understands their weight until the person they belong to is ready to carry them again. James Reeves had drawn a hawk on graph paper in October 2015 at a folding table in Coronado and called it something Walsh didn't need to know yet. Now he knew. The first gray arrived at the edge of the sky over the tree line. Not dawn yet, the suggestion of it. The slow advance of light that has no opinion about what it illuminates, that arrives every morning regardless, that finds whatever has been left behind and holds it in whatever light there is. In the empty room in the barracks, the challenge coin sat on the nightstand where she had placed it. The hawk on one face wings, spread talons curled every feather precise as intention. IV 07114 on the other. The lamp had been left on, and the light caught the worn metal and held it. James Reeves had drawn that hawk at a folding table in Coronado with a mechanical pencil and graph paper, his hands moving separately from his attention, filling in detail while his mind worked on something else. He had been 42 years old and already living with the knowledge that the work he was doing was larger than any one person and would outlast him. The most important thing he would ever do was not any specific operation. It was the passing on of something that could not be filed or classified or sealed, a way of holding yourself when everything is trying to take you apart. A cadence built from a surgeon grandfather through an intelligence architect father to a daughter who carried it through Syria and Fort Bragg and would carry it forward to wherever the mission led next. His daughter was on a plane by 0600. She would land in Germany the following morning. She would not be done. But she was one step further than she had been. And in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the city where James Reeves had taught his daughter to breathe in the backyard and to read ciphers at the kitchen table, and to understand that the most important thing is not how far you fall, but whether when you stand back up, you are standing for something worth the effort, the dawn came the same as it always did. Flat and gray and indifferent and full of light.